I've been looking forward to speaking to you again. Perry is gone for one more Sunday. He's scheduled to return next Sunday on the 12th. Please continue to pray for him and his battle. Pray for a safe journey back home and for him to feel right back at home with us again. My name is Barry Stump. All you need to know about me is that I'm a believer. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and I am a disciple of Christ. I also happen to be one of the shepherds here, and I love talking to my flock. If you're visiting with us, we welcome you here, and we thank you for choosing to worship here at South Yukon. I'm not going to have very much of a PowerPoint this morning other than the slide that you see in front of us. I basically believe that it's all about the cross. That's what it's all about. There's some white cards on the pew in front of you, so I'm going to have you kind of make your own PowerPoint. I'm going to give you 4 scriptures to look up that I'm going to refer to. So I'm going to ask you as the sermon goes along that you refer to these and you be able to look them up. You can write down Galatians 5, 16 and 17. You can write down Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. You can write down Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. You can write down 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 20 and 21. Those are the scriptures texts that I'm going to use this morning. And you can write down a question and a statement. The question I want you to write down, and basically the whole outline and the lesson title. I've got all kinds of different titles I could use. The question I want you to write down is, how much of your life does God control? How much of your life does God control? And the statement is this, and this is what I want you to remember. By the time I'm finished, I want you to remember this. You can't trust somebody that you don't know. You cannot trust somebody that you do not know. So I'm going to smile real big and try to relax. And my wife always tells me to smile more, and I try to do that. And also, Leroy tells me to speak up. So Leroy's back there, and he's supposed to give me the thumbs up or thumbs down. So I'm going to smile, and I'm going to speak up. One of our culture's biggest battles in our life centers around power and control. Even in the first century, when the New Testament was being written, Christians also had this same battle, power and control. We're going to look at a parable of Jesus from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. It's the parable some people call is the rich fool. Some of them call it the parable of a certain rich man. In Scripture, this battle is called the battle between the flesh and the spirit. This is Galatians 5, chapter 5, verses 16 and 17. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict. And that's the word I want you to remember is conflict. They're in conflict. And there's where the power and control is. They're in conflict with each other. So you are not to do whatever you want to do. And that's another thing we need to remember is we cannot do what we want to do. Because we're not our own anymore. I'm going to talk a little bit also about when you became a Christian. When you became a Christian, you died. Dead people don't have power and control. We're not to do whatever we want to do. Power and control in our culture. Why do political parties not get along? Power and control. Why do bosses and employees have conflict with each other? Power and control. Why do husbands and wives have disputes and disagreements and fights and quarrels? Power and control. Why do married couples get divorced? Power and control. Why do countries go to war with each other? Power and control. A question for our youth. Why is it so hard to raise a teenager? Power and control. I was a teenager at one time. I grew up in the 60s, and I was a teenager, so that's kind of a double whammy, so to speak. The teenagers marched on the world. They marched on campuses. They were totally upset with everything that was going on. So why is it so hard to raise a teenager? Power and control. Let's look at Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. This whole chapter starts out really kind of unique. Jesus has the ability to talk to and communicate with multiple people at one time. In verses 1 through 21, Jesus starts to speak to, there's thousands of people. So there's thousands of people that come to hear Jesus talk. But before he talks to the thousands, he's going to start talking to the 12, to his disciples. And before he even gets to this parable, there's a dispute between two guys, and two guys try to get Jesus to get in the middle of that also. So let's look at Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. That's going to be our main text. So he told them this parable. Notice the first statement comes out. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself. Now, as I read the next part, I want you to notice how many times he refers to himself. He said, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "What will I do? I will tear down my barns, and I will build bigger ones, and then I will store my surplus grain. And then I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat and drink and be merry. You will have plenty laid up for many, many years." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you, and then you will get what you prepared for yourself. And this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." So where did the conflict start? Where did the conflict start? What I'm going to do is do a little bit of an illustration. I'm going to show you what's happened in this parable. This right here is familiar to a lot of people. This is a golf hole that we use when we play miniature golf here at the building, and I used this before about 6 weeks ago. This is God right here. This is God. This golf ball is going to be me or you. So what I'm going to do is every time I'm going to read through this verse again, and every time I refer to myself or I'm going to step off and go in an opposite direction. So the question is, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns, and I will build bigger ones. And then I will store my surplus grain, and then I will say to myself, you have plenty of laid up for many years. And here I am. Now, how far am I away from God? I'm a pretty far distance from God. So then I realized, well, what am I going to do? I have to get back to God. I have something come up in my life and what I got to do. So I picked up my trusty putter here, and I start to calculate, and I start to figure out, how am I going to get back to God? What is this stick, this putter called? It's called a control stick. This is where the control comes in. As long as I try to approach this ball and try to figure out how I'm going to get it in there, how many feet, I can't hit it too far or it's going to go off in the distance. I can't hit it too short. I've got to get it there. So this is my control stick. This is what happens. Control stick. Let's go back to the parable. What's the right answer? What should have been the response of this certain rich man? What should have been the response? Let's read it a different way. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Where did the abundant harvest come from? It came from God. It's a blessing. The rich man didn't do anything. The ground gave him a blessing. The ground gave him an abundant harvest. And then he thought to himself. And then that's where the disconnect all starts right there. The next question should have been, what shall we do? What shall we do? We have no place to store our crops. And then he said, this is what we will do. We will store all the grain that we have from this blessing. And we will store it in my barn, our barn. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to other people's barns and we're going to take this same blessing and we're going to put it in their barns. We're going to share it. What I'm trying to get you to understand is that the blessings that we have in life, they're our blessings. They're God's blessings. God's given them to us, and it's our job to share them or give them away. Take what you need for yourself. Help other people. So, we will not tear down our barns. We will go to other people's barns, and we will fill their barns. And we will store enough grain so that everybody can live for a long, long time and be blessed for a long, long time. And then we will say to ourselves, we have plenty of grain stored up for many years. Now we can take life easy, we can eat, we can drink, we can be merry. And then the conclusion is always the same. This is how it will be to share with others and how you can be rich towards God. The last part of this parable in the NIV says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves. Think about what you can do for other people, and then you will be rich toward God. So being rich in this world, we're all rich, but being rich toward God is the most important thing, being rich toward God. What are some blessings that we receive today? Raises at work. What should your response be? What can we do with this? What can we do with this money, with this extra money? Promotions at work. Blessings of having more responsibility. How can we, God and myself, God and you, how can we make this to where God is glorified in this? You get a new husband and a new wife. You find your love of your wife. And you can say to yourself, what can we do? What can we as a couple and God do in the future? You receive a blessing of a new child. It's God's child. What can we do with this life? What can we do? You get an opportunity to explore, or you get an opportunity to travel. What can we do? One of the most wonderful things that Marie and I get to do is to travel a lot, and we love to travel. But we always try to find people that are like ourselves. We always try to worship with people. And we make so many new friends, and we make so many people and just learn from each other. And we take our culture and our Christianity to them, and we try to absorb from them. You get your first vehicle, the young people here. You get your first vehicle, access to a vehicle. That's a blessing from God. What can we do? What can we do with this? You get your first phone. What can we do with this phone to glorify God? You get your first house. What can we do with this house? We have a lot of athletes in this building, a lot of young people that play sports. That's an ability that God gives you. That's not your ability. That's something that God gave you. You need to think to yourself, what can we do? Do not leave God out. When it comes time for you to perform and to do and to be engaged in your sport, make sure that God is there with you. Make sure that other people know that you're different. You're in worship when you need to worship, and you're play when you need to play. How about vacations? How many vacations do you get a year? 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Think to yourself, vacations are a blessing from God. What can we do with one of these vacations? Give a vacation to God. Go serve the Lord with one of your vacations. The answer should always be, what can we do? What can God do with a blessing? You should always include God in your blessing. So where are you today? We need to make sure that people know that we are controlled by God. We are not controlled by ourselves. Is God in control of your life? How much of God is in control of your life? We are different people. We are different than the world. And the people should know that we are different from the world. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in the view of mercy of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to this pattern of world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then you will be able to test and approve that God is good, pleasing, His perfect will. We are to be different people. We also are to be ambassadors of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5, verses 20 and 21. We therefore are Christ's ambassadors. We're different people. We're not our ambassadors. We're not ambassadors for anybody but Christ. As though God were making His appeal through us, we implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled with God. God made Him, had no sin to be sin for us, so that in Him we might become the righteousness of God. What shall we do? People are always looking at us. We're Christians. People are always looking at us. They should know that our power and our control, we are controlled by God. So again, I want to ask you, where are you today? Where are you today? Perhaps you are away from God. So what do you do? What do I do? What you need to do is take your control stick and you need to cast it aside. That's what you need to do. So how do I get back to God without my control stick? Without me being in control? Like I said 6 weeks ago, you pick up yourself, you pick up the ball, and you repent, and you come over and place it as close to God as you can. As close to God as you can. You basically go back to the cross. When you became a Christian, you went to the cross. In Romans 6, 1 through 20, 1 through 15, there's about 15 verses, and it all talks about the death that you go. It's a comparison between the death of Christ and your death as a person. So you die to yourself. And when you die to yourself, like I said before, you do not have any control. You are God's person. You are God's person. That's how you get back to close to God. I'm going to read a conclusion here that I read from an article not too recently when I was trying to get this lesson together, and I couldn't say it any better than what was read, and I added a few things to it. But this is the conclusion. You can't trust somebody you don't know. So when you come back to God and when you stay close to God, that's the hardest thing to do in a Christian, is to stay close to God. How close to God are you? Does God control your life? You have to read the Bible every day. You have to pray to God every day. You have to worship God every day. You have to fellowship with God every day. That's how you stay close to God. And you get the control of yourself completely out of the way and let God control your life. You can't trust somebody that you don't know. There's only one way to know God, through His Word and through prayer. There's no magic formula to make us spiritual giants overnight. There's no mystical power to pray 3 times a day to mature us, to build our faith, and to make us towers of strength and confidence. There is only one Bible, the single source of power that will change your life from the inside and change it from the outside. But it takes effort. It takes diligent, everyday effort. You need to pray every day. You need to read the Word every day. You need to worship every day. You need to fellowship every day. To know God who controls everything, and God controls everything. We don't control anything. We are His. Jesus is our master. When we became a Christian, we said, I'm dead. Jesus is alive. So if we drink deeply with His Word, in His Word, let us also fill our minds and our hearts. The sovereignty of God will become very clear to us, and we will rejoice in it because we know that we are intimately and completely trusting in God, who controls everything for His perfect purposes. Stay close to God. Always think of Him as your partner. What can we do? Never leave God out and never leave God behind in whatever blessing that you've given in life, wherever your journey takes you in life. We're going to stand and sing an invitation song. Where are you today? Perhaps you're not close to God. Perhaps you're over here and you need to come back. Perhaps you've never got close to God. You've never made the step to say, I want God to control my life. So let's stand and sing to each other.